is the Floridaville. Get to know the people behind the Florida names you know. I'm your host, Rosanna Catalano. On this episode, we get to know Ben Odom, Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at NASCAR. We are we are video streaming today's episode remotely. I'm in my office in Tallahassee, and Ben is speaking to us from his office in Daytona Beach. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good afternoon, Rosanna. Thanks for having me.
So in the introduction to the show, I introduced you as the Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at NASCAR. This sounds really cool. So can you tell us what your day-to-day role is?
Yeah, Rosanna, it's I think the neat part about it is there's probably not a real day-to-day. Every day is a little bit different in the role here. I tell people and kind of describe it as functioning kind of at the intersection of where the business meets the legal part of any corporation. And so that can be mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, corporate governance, development deals. I think I kind of function in maybe the non-traditional space when you think of NASCAR. I think when you flip on the television and you see NASCAR, you see the cars going in circles, you see live audience, you see a lot of sponsorships. That's not really the area that I function in anymore. I function in quite a bit of the kind of behind the scenes governance, operations, and development side of the business.
So for those of us in the audience unfamiliar with NASCAR, can you tell us about the company?
I can. NASCAR is privately owned by the France family. And it was formally started in 1948. So going on, over 70 years now. Bill France Sr. started it. And the way he started it is a bit interesting in that they've been racing cars forever. I think I've always heard that the first race between two cars was the day they built the second car. And they've been racing ever since. But they were kind of all over the place, and there would be multiple races, multiple weekends. Promoters were not always being honest with the drivers and vice versa. And Bill France Sr. understood that you need to get the show organized and you need to have your top guys racing at the same place at the same time in a more organized fashion. And he organized all that actually in Daytona Beach. The first ever NASCAR organization meeting was at the Streamline Hotel over beachside. And clearly his vision paid off because it turned into a significant and major sport.
So what makes NASCAR different from other forms of auto racing like Formula One or drag racing?
It's different than drag racing in that drag racing is all on the same size facility. Every drag race is a quarter mile and it's just straight. And they last 3 or 4 seconds per run. NASCAR is all on a closed course, multiple laps, a bit of a test of endurance. The typical race is between 400 and 500 miles, and they are stock car bodies. They are supposed to look and feel like the cars that you and I drive up and down the road. That's how it got started. That's different than Formula One in that Formula One is open wheel. They're much lighter, higher horsepower. They are incredibly sophisticated engineered vehicles, whereas stock cars are, especially the ones in NASCAR, I mean, they're highly engineered, they're sophisticated vehicles, but they're not on the same engineering platform that a Formula One car is. In the movie Days of Thunder, I always thought that the best description of the difference between the Formula One or Indy car and a NASCAR car was the Indy cars are half as heavy, or they weigh half as much, and the tires are twice as wide. And a stock car is the tires are half as wide and they weigh twice as much, and they're a lot harder to control and a lot harder to drive because of that.
Well, thank you for explaining that. I've always wanted to know the difference. I've seen the sport only on TV and not in person. So it's hard to make out those differentiations when you're just watching on TV. So how did you get this job at NASCAR?
I moved to Daytona Beach from Tallahassee back in 2006, actually a long time ago. And it was to work for a company called International Speedway Corporation. And ISC, as it was called, was a publicly traded company on NASDAQ that owned 12 racetracks around the country. And the controlling shareholders were essentially the France family. Their group owned 77% of the voting shares, about 45 to 46% of the overall company. And I came into work there really entry level, was looking to leave a previous career, was looking to leave Tallahassee, wanted to stay in Florida, wanted to be ideally in a beach town, and started the search there, and kind of randomly got hired to work as an entry level attorney. And they have not run me off yet. And then in effective October 18th of 2019, NASCAR and ISC merged, so that ISC went private, bought out all the public shareholders, merged in with NASCAR. And so I transitioned from being an ISC employee to a NASCAR employee on January 1, 2020.
Incredible. Well, let's take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about pets and what you were like growing up. At Rocket Ship Consultants, our mission is to take your organization to the next level. Our team develops strategic communication plans that help entrepreneurs, corporations, associations, and individuals reach new heights. Our consulting team is made up of attorneys with additional experience in journalism, public relations, politics, broadcasting, and advocacy. Let us help you take that dream you have for a podcast or video show and make it into a reality. We can create networking opportunities, educational forums, and interactive conferences to spread your message. Let our team provide you with fresh ideas and inspiration. Rocket Ship Consultants offers a variety of services, so check out our website at rocketshipconsultants.com. Take off with Rocket Ship Consultants and launch your organization with us. Welcome back to the Floridaville. On this episode, we're speaking to Ben Odom, Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs at NASCAR. Now, I've known you for many years now, and I know that dogs are important to you and pets. So tell me about the legacy of Jess.
Thanks for asking. Jess was she was part Basset Hound, part Princess, and rescued her, got her out of the Panhandle over in East Point, not too far west of where you're at right now. Found her online, drove over there and picked her up in July 10th, 2010. And she was with me for almost 11 years. I got her when she was about a year old, and she made it all the way through the Daytona 500 of 2021. And so great dog, great life, had a lot of fun together, was my boat buddy. And so now we're going to take the summer and kind of figure out the next dog rescue plan.
Yeah, sometimes you have to take some time and sort of heal your heart a little bit with your fur friends. It's hard.
I miss it. I would have a house full of them if I could make that happen.
So tell me where you were born.
I was born and grew up in Lake City, Florida, about exactly halfway distance between you and me right now. It's over there where I-10 and I-75 meet. Small little blue collar town. A population of about 40,000 or so.
And what was home life? What was your home life like growing up?
Home life was a lot of fun. Small town life, a lot of fun. High school football games on Friday nights. Every now and then you go to a dirt track race on Saturday night. My parents got divorced when I was 8, so I would spend a little time at my mom's house during the week, spend weekends at the dad's house. Had great group of friends growing up. I met my best friend when we were in kindergarten together, and have been best friends ever since. And there were 4 guys. We all graduated high school together and remained incredibly close. And we were always playing some sort of sport, whether it was football or soccer or basketball, or we were the 4 of us were kind of always together, and always, for the most part, keeping each other out of trouble.
Well, sometimes it's nice to get in trouble with your friends at that age. So, tell me, did you work in high school?
A bit. Most of high school was taken up with sports. From the time I was growing up, that's all I remember doing. I don't remember whether be it at my mom's house, my dad's house. I spent a lot of time with my grandfather and grandmother on my mom's side too. My granddad was a huge influence in my life, and I spent a ton of time at his house. I don't ever remember Saturday morning cartoons. I don't ever remember kind of the traditional kid stuff, waking up and eating cereal and watching cartoons. I remember from the time we woke up, either my granddad had the news on or there was some sort of sport on, whether it was a Formula One race early in the morning over in Europe or a ball game of any type, regular football, arena football, soccer, basketball. I grew up about the time ESPN kind of started taking off, and whatever they had on, we were watching as kids. And damn, 30 years later, still haven't managed to get out of sports yet.
That's incredible. So were you always into fast cars?
I liked racing growing up. I never really set out to work in it or thought that I would work in it. My dad drove had his own big rig 18-wheeler. And so he really liked working on cars and messing with cars, and was a pretty good kind of a function as a shade tree mechanic. If something broke on a car, he could fix it. My granddad, who I spent a ton of time around, he really wasn't interested in racing, but he owned a motel over in White Springs, Florida. And remember, he told me Bobby Allison stayed at the motel one night. And so, that was kind of as much as he knew or cared about racing. But I appreciated the sport. I liked learning about the sport. I liked watching the races on TV. And then my dad brought me to a race in Daytona at the big speedway when I was 8 years old. And kind of been watching racing as a fan ever since.
Where did you go to college, and what was your major?
I went to undergrad at Florida State in Tallahassee, and I majored in political science and communications.
Is that why you went to law school? I mean, that seems like that's where people with, an undergrad in political science are always headed to law school. Did you know you were headed that way?
I didn't when I first got there. When I first got there, I did, like most people, tried to spend a little time figuring out what I wanted to do, and was already going to be a communications major, though I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. But started out on that track, and then decided, hey, I'd like to go to law school. And so that's when I added political science to the fold, and kind of drove the communications track towards the comm studies component, which seemed like there really wasn't a pre-law major like you would have a pre-med major. But that was as close to it as I could kind of piece together, and started down that track maybe my sophomore year.
Now, NASCAR has a very large and loyal fan base. So a large part of your career has been working in a very public and very sophisticated business. When NASCAR makes a move, the public notices. So how do you deal with that type of scrutiny when making decisions for an entity? Or maybe do you even take that into consideration?
You have to take it into consideration, and you're right. It is large. It is public. And what NASCAR also has is you've got a bunch of, you have a lot of fans that are paying attention, and they're the paying customer. They have to want to watch the sport in order for the sport to thrive. And the other thing NASCAR has that I think a lot of sports and business has, but we certainly have it, is you've got an industry of stakeholders that all require, they all have to be successful for the sport to thrive. And you've got, it's the race team owners that are spending a lot of money to put these cars out on the track. It's the drivers that are literally risking their life every week to try to compete and put on a good show for the fans. We're one of the few sports that if there were no sponsors, there would probably be no racing. I mean, every one of these cars comes with a large corporate sponsor. They're a stakeholder that you have to factor in. You have to factor in the manufacturers themselves. Without the support from Chevrolet and Toyota and Ford, there wouldn't be anything to race. And then what is a significant component, as almost as equal to the fans, is the television broadcasters. So much of all sports now, your revenue is incredible. It's made up a significant amount by the live media rights. Whether that's 10 years ago that was all television, now it's streaming and digital distribution in addition to linear television distribution. And so all those stakeholders, they've got a seat at the table. And I think that's where the hardest things to do is you want to drive the sport forward. You got to make sure it works for every one of those stakeholders, because if if one of those fails, the table will topple over. And NASCAR's ownership and the France family and their leadership, and Steve Phelps and Steve O'Donnell and Darrell Wolf, they have to do a really good job of making decisions for the best interest of everybody in the sport, and understand that it can't always just be about NASCAR's bottom line, because a move that might really be really good for the bottom line of this building might cripple a race team. And ultimately, that's going to come back to bite us. You got to take a real long view of this stuff. And I think NASCAR and the team they've done a really good job over their 70-year history.
So how do you deal with the pressure of working in such a fast-paced environment with big decisions that have to be made every day?
Number one, it really doesn't feel like pressure. I think most of the people probably watching the podcast or that get into this type of industry, they kind of like it. I think we appreciate the grind. I certainly do. I like rapidly changing topics and learning new stuff all the time. And I think the benefit of here is you're around like-minded people. My colleagues to the left and right of me in this building are the best I would put them up against anybody in any sport. And when you're all kind of in it together, and it's run by a family with incredible integrity and incredible vision, and when you believe in the cause, it really doesn't feel like pressure, other than you don't want to let them down. I don't want to let Jim France down. I don't want to let Lisa Kennedy down. I don't want to let Ben Kennedy down. That's the real pressure. Other than that, though, it feels like, hey, we're all in it together. And if I need help with something, there's a army of people lining up to help me. And when somebody else needs help, hey, I'm going to storm the hill with that army that's ready to help them. And that makes it a fun place to go to work. And it also makes it, I don't really feel a ton of pressure or anxiety coming to work every day. I feel, we're kind of all in it together, and it's a good team effort.
It's nice to be invigorated by your work rather than drained. And that's nice to hear.
Yeah, I think so.
What were some of the challenges you have had to deal with at NASCAR during COVID and may still be dealing with?
Well, unfortunately, we're still dealing with it. And, I think a lot of folks in business, individuals' challenges were very similar. And I think the first challenge was the unknown. I think the unknown drives anxiety. And if you know kind of what's going on, and you can figure out a way to solve it, or you can figure out a way to navigate it, or if you know how long something's going to last, you can put together a plan to weather whatever storm. And this thing, look, it crept up on most people out of nowhere. Nobody knew how it didn't. It lasted a lot longer than anybody thought it would, and it's still lasting and it's still evolving. So that unknown has created a lot of anxiety. I think what the impact for us, probably fairly similar to a lot of businesses, is it didn't just impact our business and our role on the track and the product that we were putting on the track. Yes, it was affected because we run large events where a lot of people gather, and you couldn't do that overnight. You couldn't do that. I will never forget watching the NBA games on that Thursday night and then pulling them off the court and said, you can't have them. And you knew right then we weren't going to race that weekend, and life may not be the same for a long time. And if that's all you dealt with, it would be significant, but I do think everybody would figure out a way. The other thing to this was, it affected every single employee that we've got here working in the building or working around the country. So in addition to, hey, our employee base, we got to figure out how to solve this thing and how to keep the business afloat and making money and not going bankrupt. And we've got to figure it out while people can't come to the office, or not everybody can come to the office, or some people are sick. And you had to take into account every single person in this industry, their individual situation, and find a way to make it work for them. Not everybody could come into the office. Most people didn't come into the office. People are caring for elderly parents. People have young kids that now they got to teach their kids. They can't go to school anymore. Well, it's going to be tough to ask that guy to work or that lady to work while they're got to take care of their kids. And so that was hard to ask our employees to do something that we'd never have to ask them to do before, at a time when it was required to keep the company afloat, and ask them to do it while they're having to deal with something in their personal life that they'd probably never contemplated. That was a lot to ask of our employees.
Yeah, I often think if this was 10 years ago, when we didn't quite have the same video conferencing technologies, what would have happened? We were just now having all of these video conferencing technologies being introduced. So it was sort of life saving, I think, for a lot of businesses and people trying to keep things afloat. Um, for someone interested in working for a large sports organization, a corporation, what advice would you give them?
I would ask them first, like, why do they want to do that? And I would hope it's for a good reason. I do feel like people want to work in sports and because they like sports. And maybe I'm a hypocrite. I do like sports. That's not really, I didn't really set out to work in sports. It just kind of happened. One of the best, some advice a friend of mine gave me was, his dad told him, he's like, son, do you like to play a lot of golf? And he said, yeah. And he said, well, you need to sell insurance because those guys play a lot of golf. You know who doesn't play golf is somebody that works in golf because they work around it all the time and they don't want to, you never get to do it. And so I think for somebody that wants to work in sports, understand what it's like to work in that sport and make sure that it's something they want to do, because I'm not going to the races every weekend. I'm not in the grandstands every weekend. I'm not changing. I'm in a corporate office working on corporate stuff, mergers and acquisitions and land development and compliance and lawsuits. I'm working on the same type of stuff that most attorneys are working on. I just happen to do it for a really great family that's got a really neat product that they put out on television every weekend. If they still want to work in sports, I mean, the advice is there are a million paths to get to work in a sport, and that you could talk to 100 people and 100 people are going to have 100 different stories of how they wound up in the position they ended up in at a major sports facility. My story is different than every other attorney that we've got on the team here. And that's probably what you find most sports franchises. And so there's not really a path that you say, okay, you go take these prerequisites and then you get this advanced degree and then you go get a JD MBA program or something like that. That may work. It may not. I mean, really, it's kind of knowing what you want to do and acquiring enough skills and getting lucky as well. I got really lucky to meet who I met. In the legal world, there's a little bit of a long answer, but in the legal world, again, we're working on the same stuff that a lot of people, a lot of industries work on. And so those basic legal skills to work in-house anywhere, labor and employment law, like I say, mergers, acquisitions, contracts, compliance, those skills are all transferable no matter what the sport is. So if you don't get that first break right out of law school to go work in a sport right away, take whatever job you've got and develop those skills because they are transferable, and just keep working your butt off and develop those skills and learn a ton. And when the time is right, you can transfer that in and be a valuable asset to a sports franchise at some point.
Now we've talked about NASCAR sort of, but let's talk about NASCAR as a sport. Who's your favorite driver?
So I don't know that I've got a favorite driver now that I work here, where I just pull for them all. Okay. What you kind of end up doing is, the guys that are super nice, you end up hoping that they turn out successful and they've got things going their way. And so a couple of the guys that I've been fortunate enough to interact with and know their story that are just genuine great guys are like Martin Truex Jr., who's he's he's from Mayetta, New Jersey, but he's kind of a good old boy. He hunts, he fishes. Bass Pro Shop was a sponsor. He's not married. He's got a longtime girlfriend, Sherry Pollock, that's had ovarian cancer twice, and he stayed by her side the entire time. And you couldn't meet a classier, nicer individual. And so I hope he's a 2017 Cup Series champion. I hope he wins another one. A great ambassador for the sport. Some of the younger guys that have come along that are really fun to be around and do great stuff. Like Ryan Blaney is a really cool guy, nice guy, second generation racer. His dad drove sprint cars and drove some of the Cup Series cars. I think Chase Elliott, I love to see the second generation drivers do well. I like to see the drivers with Southern accents do well. So I do like your Ryan Blaney's and your Chase Elliott's. And then I like to see guys with a little bit of a non-traditional story, like a Bubba Wallace, a guy that came out of the driver development program for Roush Fenway and is now driving for Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan's team. I think that it would be a lot of Michael Jordan coming into this sport was a huge deal, and him owning a race car is a huge deal. And so I hope whoever's driving for him, right now it's Bubba, that may expand. I hope that he does really well. And then the last guy that I've got a soft spot for that I just hope kicks butt as soon as he's in a car capable of doing it is Ross Chastain. And that's because Ross is from Florida, grew up on a watermelon farm, has won. He's a natural talent. He has not won yet in the Cup Series. This is his first year. But in our other series, whenever he wins a race, they bring him a watermelon out to the car, and he smashes it on the racetrack. And I just think he's a blue collar guy, hard worker, a fellow Floridian, and I hope that Ross has good things in his future as well.
So what is the funniest or most unusual race day ritual you have heard of?
Race day ritual, the funniest I've heard of is a guy named Cale Yarborough, who doesn't race anymore. He retired in the late 80s, but he's one of the legends of the sport. He's in the Hall of Fame, 3-time Cup champion, won 84 races. He's from Timmonsville, South Carolina, one of the toughest individuals that's ever come through this sport. And back in the late 1979 was the first race broadcast live on television. Ken Squire put it on CBS, and they put the first in-car camera in. It was a big, like a full-size video camera that they just mounted in the car. And they did that for a couple of years. And in, I think the early 80s, like 83, 84, Cale Yarborough, they put the in-car camera in Cale Yarborough's car. And the story I heard was all during practice and qualifying leading up to the race, the CBS engineers, they kept hearing this feedback. And they're like, what? And they would swap out equipment. They would swap out microphones. Like, what is this feedback? Well, it turned out that when Cale drives the car, he kind of mimics the engine noise as he's going around. And you're kind of as he's turning the wheel. And it was driving the CBS guys crazy. So now when you go back and listen and they're in his car, you can kind of hear Cale kind of mimic the engine while he's driving. That's the strangest and funniest race day ritual I think I've ever heard.
That's very funny. So what is next for you and NASCAR?
What's next for NASCAR is it's an exciting time in the sport. Like I said, the merger was completed at the end of 19. And I don't know, had we tried to do this being two separate companies, how we would have made it through 2020. We had to move a lot of things around and be way more nimble than we ever thought we could. And I don't think we could have done it under two separate companies, especially one of them being publicly traded. That would have been a real hamstring for us. Having gone through that, I think what we've realized is that we are a more nimble sport than we thought. We can do some neat things. And so going from 2020 to 2021 was the largest schedule shakeup in the history of the sport. We're going to multiple new tracks that we've never been to before or haven't been to for a number of years. We're changing the days that we race. We've tried midweek racing. We're trying shorter races. We're trying different formats of races. I think gone are the old, hey, we're going to race at 1:00 on Sunday afternoon. It's going to be 500 miles and it's going to be at the same track every time, at the same time every year. I think those days are over. And so watching where this current generation of leadership and the future generation of leadership under Ben Kennedy's tutelage, watching where the new venues that we go to, the new types of formats, and then I keep repeating myself, everything's new. We have a new car on the horizon. The car you look out there and see race this Sunday at Indianapolis, it's a completely different car. It's going to have a different engine. It's going to have a different chassis. It's got different aerodynamics. It's single lug nut instead of 5-lug nut. I mean, it's got an entirely new look and feel and sound to it. And the idea is it needs to look more like the car on the track. It needs to be more relevant to the product that's being on the track. And it's going to be better cost containment for the teams as well, which should bring in the ability to have more teams and more new car owners. And so knowing that, I think 2020, even without COVID, I think 2019 and 2020 were going to be transition years for the sport. But I think I think the trajectory that the sport's got from the hard work that the teams put in 2019, 2020, 2021, getting this thing going, it's exciting to see where it's going to go for the next decade, because it's going to look a lot different sitting in 2031 than it does sitting here in 2021.
We like to end our show with a little fun by asking all of our guests the same 7 questions. What would people be surprised to know about you?
Besides the fact that I'm an attorney, I think they're surprised when they find that out. I think they would be surprised to know how much Diet Coke I drink in a day. It is an unhealthy amount.
I see you drinking that Diet Coke. I'm like, this might be a commercial. I'm gonna have to get their sponsorship.
Yeah, I think that would surprise folks. Look, I think it's surprising. Like I've run 4 marathons as well, and I think that I survived the first one may surprise most people. So,
when you have guests in town, where is your favorite place to take them?
My favorite place to take them is Daytona International Speedway. If you've never been there and you've never seen it, to drive in that place, just to drive by it. The front grandstands are a mile long. You're in Tallahassee, so you walk by or drive by Doak Campbell Stadium every day, right? Seats 80,000 people, big place. You can fit 15 Doak Campbell stadiums inside Daytona International Speedway. It's a massive facility. It's a very impressive place, and I love bringing people here that have never seen it before.
What is the name of a book you recently read that you could not put down, or the name of a show you enjoyed binge watching?
During the pandemic, I binge watched Bloodline on Netflix, primarily because it was set in the Florida Keys, which is my favorite spot in the world.
Among your close family and friends, what are you best known for?
I'm best known for being outdoors, primarily on a boat, fishing.
If you have a nickname, who gave it to you?
If I do have a nickname, I just go by my last name, Odom. And it's because Ben Kennedy is 3 doors down, and we work on a lot of stuff together, and we don't try to get us confused. So they just call me Odom around the office.
If you knew you could not fail, what would you attempt?
I want to swim with great white sharks without a cage. And that's failure. If you swim with sharks without a cage, failure is real failure. And if I knew I wouldn't fail, that's what I would do.
That's pretty crazy, but cool. What are the top 3 things you love about living in Florida?
I love the weather. I love the access to water that I have for my fishing habit. And I love that most of my close friends and family are still in the state of Florida and within driving distance to spend some quality time with.
Ben, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the time.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast channel on YouTube and all your favorite podcast listening platforms. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Visit our website to see some extras on Ben. Our audio editor for this podcast episode is Joy Tootle with Rocket Ship Consultants. If you're interested in starting a live stream or podcast, contact Joy at joy@rocketshipconsultants.com.